department. I also am affiliated with two graduate schools at UMass Boston. I would like to welcome you all to this guest lecture by Dr. Amneris Chaparro, whom I'm going to introduce shortly. And I just want to say a little bit about this course for those of you who are joining us here for the first time. This is one of several courses that I teach here at UMass Boston. And the course focuses on gender, culture, power, and the politics of knowledge production in Africa. A key theme in this course is women's resistance, mobilizations, and movement building in Africa. I thought it would be important to mention that given the subject of your talk today, Dr. Chaparro Paris. And we focus on these kinds of mobilizations both during colonial, anti-colonial struggles and also in post-colonial Africa. And also this is one of the areas of my research right now. I focus on gender, social media, social movements, and social change, especially in Sudan, which is my country of origin. I've had the pleasure of visiting Mexico City, by the way, in 2008 when it hosted the International AIDS Conference. Yeah, it's a wonderful city, actually. And so, I mean, this is one of the reasons I'm really excited about this lecture, one of many reasons I'm excited about this guest lecture. And the title of the lecture is Why Do March, as you know. And I think that this is a brilliant title, both metaphorically and literally, right? And I'm not going to give you any spoilers here from the lecture, okay? And so I am really pleased with this collaboration with UNAM and with our learning about protest and women's mobilizations and activism in Latin America. I am an Africanist and I study the MENA region as well, the Middle East and North Africa, but I have learned so much from Latin American scholars, feminist, social movement, development, and critical development scholars. And I have a really long list that I can share with you. But what I would like to do now is to introduce our wonderful speaker. Dr. Amneris Chaparro Martínez is a researcher at the Center for Research and Gender Studies at UNAM in Mexico City. She is also a visiting professor and a Rice Fellow at Yale University. She is a political theorist whose research focuses on normative ethics, feminist mobilizations in Latin America, and on feminist social epistemologies. And she's teaching a course on this subject at Yale. Amneris holds a PhD and an MA in political theory from the University of Essex in the United Kingdom. And a BA in sociology from UNAM in Mexico. Her recent publications in Spanish include articles on feminism, gender, and epistemic injustice, the feminist wave, a necessary metaphor, and she has also written a book on feminism and neoliberalism, work, subjectivities, and resistance. Welcome. Thank you very much. Just also to let you know that nada does not mean nothing in Arabic. It means morning deo and generosity, because nada means nothing in Spanish for those who speak Spanish, right?
Thank you very much, Nada, for inviting me to this guest lecture, and also to all of you for spending some time with me today. I hope that at some point I see many of you in Mexico. You're very welcome there at UNAM, and I also want to thank Hector for organizing this opportunity to do one of the things that I like the most, which is talking. But now I'm going to talk about something that I find fascinating. And I know this is a class on African feminism and mobilizations, and then one wonders what should we talk about? Latin American feminisms. And I think I'd be very happy if by the end of this talk, when we have a discussion, we can share some commonalities and see the points of difference and inquire what is going on with mobilizations by women and by feminists in both regions. So also both regions are very complex. It is unfair to talk about Latin America as a monolithic concept, the same with Africa. So of course, this picture is going to be a bit general in that sense. I just want to give you a glimpse of what happens in Latin America and what can happen in the past few years. So for today, I have divided this presentation. Exactly. Okay. This takes some time. So those are the topics that I want to address. I want to talk about with women marching, and in particular women marching in March, as it happened yesterday. Some of the pictures that you will see from the Mexican mobilization are pictures that occurred yesterday during the demonstration for Wednesday. And one thing is that we talk about women marching, and the other is that we talk about feminist demonstrations. So many women do not want to identify themselves with the word feminism. So they are very clear about their movements as women's movement. And I think that's an important distinction. However, it's also necessary that we understand that women and feminized subjects have always been involved in revolutions, and they have created their own. So when we talk about women marching or feminist marching, we are just being very specific about our involvement. Also, as I was saying, I want to talk about this very briefly in the framework of International Women's Day. Then I will give you a quick glimpse of feminist formations in the region in the 20th century. Of course, these formations are in a way informed, but also resistant to hegemonic feminism, that is a feminism that comes from the global north, in particular the UK and the United States. And then I want to focus on what we're going to call the contemporary feminist demonstrations, and in particular on the year 2019, which is a trigger year for this type of mobilizations. And by the end of the talk, I want to address what might be a challenge for feminism, and that challenge we're going to call neoliberal feminism, and I'll try to explain what we mean by that. So, as I was telling you, feminist mobilizations, they have to do with how women engage politically in specific moments. Throughout history, women have not been alien to the notion of mobilization. If we think about modernity, think about 18th century Europe, women were there in the French Revolution. Women have led farmers' mobilizations throughout history. Women have led strikes, but there are some particular things, some particular parts, types of the demonstrations that we can call feminists. And these come in three shapes, I think. This is just for analytical purposes. The first one, as I did say, has to do with the International Women's Day. This is a sort of call for women all over the world to take on the streets and commemorate not only past struggles for political rights, but also to demand justice. Now, there's also the 25th of November demonstrations that are on the framework of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. So on these dates, it's usually that women organize through different means, and they go on streets and take over. But there are also impromptu demonstrations, that is, demonstrations that have to do with particular contexts that are triggered by specific things, such as probably police violence or impunity from the state. So that also happens. And I think that is one key for us to understand the way many of the current mobilizations have this sort of characteristic that they are just, you know, spontaneous in that sense. They don't occur within a wider framework like March 8th or November the 25th. So very briefly, I just want to address international women's rights demonstrations, because we just had one yesterday, and in Latin America, this has become a very important day for women of all walks of life to go and denounce, in particular, forms of violence against women and girls. International Women's Day has socialist origins. In fact, during many years, this was a celebration or commemoration in Soviet countries. It was not until 1975 that the UN, probably with the input of thriving feminist movement in the 1970s, decided to expand and to declare International Women's Day for all its member states. But historically, it was the socialist feminists who gave the first signal that it was important to talk about, to dedicate a day for women workers. So what we have is a history of strikes in the earlier, in the early 20th century. There are so many strikes led by women that we don't know about. And what is particular is that these strikes took place in factories that were dedicated to textile manufacturing. So there's also a gender idea that women have nimble fingers, that they can do delicate work with the fabrics. And that happens to this day. We have this idea, and we have evidence, empirical evidence of women working in sweatshops and maquilas and doing the clothes that we wear. And these are precarious jobs. People don't get much money for their work, and they are exploited, and they live under terrible conditions, sometimes to this day. Like in the early 20th century, they don't have many rights. They don't even have bathroom breaks. Their wages are quite low. So that was the spirit informing this strike in the early 20th century, and that led many women to take political action, also in the framework of the fight for women's rights, in particular, but not exclusively, the right for voting, and to vote and to be able to be voted. So, as I was telling you, this was a very important date for Soviet countries after the Russian Revolution in 1917. It was established that the 8th of March was the official date for this celebration or this commemoration of women workers. These are just some images of well, this one is this is from the Germany. This is from Russia. So you see, there's an important message conveyed there about the role of women in society. These roles, however, even in the Soviet Union, were not exempt from the oppressive regime of gender. That is, we see, even when it's about women's workers, we also see the association of women with maternity and you know, traditional feminized roles in some cases. And as I was telling you, the 20th century has been very important in the shaping and reshaping of feminism and feminist mobilization. And the 8th of March contributed to that in the sense that from 1975 on, the way in which feminists have been able to engage in the political agenda has been growing. And so we have the articulation during the 20th century, in particular the second half, of a diverse movement when we talk about feminism, probably it's better to do it in plural. We should talk about feminisms, and they have different areas of impact. One has to do with the acquisition, the fight for political rights, as I was telling you. We might think that those rights are guaranteed. We have the right to vote, we have the right to go to school, we have the right for an education, we have, look at this, the right for reproductive rights. Not necessarily, right? In some countries that doesn't happen anymore. So we tend to take for granted the notion that these rights are fixed, are sedimented in our society. And what we usually see with any feminist proposal is a backlash afterwards. So it's important that this notion of rights, we don't lose sight of it, in the sense that rights are never guaranteed. They are we conquer them through different means, like the struggle, like the strike, demonstrations, political lobbying, etc. So I just wanted to make this point very clearly, because in the US, I think there's now an emergency in relation to reproductive rights. And that was a win from feminist movement. And now what's happening there is very interesting. Whereas now in Latin America, for example, in Mexico in particular, reproductive rights are guaranteed. And this has been a very long struggle. So let's not take rights for granted. Then, not only from a political movement perspective, but also within academia, the 20th century has seen how the entrance of women within university and school spaces has shaped and has given us new disciplines, in the case of women and gender studies, and also feminist theory, which are subjects that some people still look with a bit of skepticism, you know, like we don't have a good rep in a sense, because what happens with women's studies and gender studies and feminist theory is that they cannot only be disciplines that try to describe and try to understand and try to explain why there are gender inequalities, why there are persistent inequalities between men and women, but they also want to change the world. So they have this revolutionary potential and characteristics. And that's why when you want to change something, it's always seen with some skepticism. So there is also a backlash for women and gender studies. And I think we can say something similar to critical race theory. It also has this potential for emancipation. So what comes after that? A backlash from the Spanish War. Also during the 20th century, we have the idea of different feminist waves. And the notion of the feminist wave has become a master narrative to explain the different stages of feminism till today. The wave narrative is quite powerful. People talk about the first wave as with the suffragettes and probably the socialists, and the second wave comes from the 70s. And it's the one that sort of helped to propel International Women's Day to the way we know it today. And then there's not much agreement about when the third wave comes. And some people say that we are today surfing the fourth wave of feminism. So this master narrative is not without problems, but it has helped us to tell the story of feminism. And in particular, non-hegemonic feminisms have been struggling with the narrative. Some of them in Mexico, for example, some feminists do engage with the wave narratives, others don't. So that's also an interesting thing. But I just wanted to tell you this because it has shaped the way we understand feminism. I've already told you about the backlash, but I will come back to this in a minute. Now, I want to focus, as I was telling you, on the notion of contemporary feminist demonstrations. By contemporary, I don't mean only present, like today's feminism. I mean the conjunction of different political struggles that have to do with this fight for not losing rights. So the notion of the contemporary is not a fixed temporal notion that I am thinking of. I'm thinking more of it as an interwoven, an interlinked set of feminist practices and narratives and actions and theories. And in this sense, there is one particular thing with contemporary political, feminist mobilizations. I think violence has become the crucial point of articulation of these mobilizations. That doesn't mean that violence is new to the feminist movement. Feminist theorists and scholars and activists have been thinking about violence for a long time. It was very important also in the 1970s, when suddenly they were like, oh, you know, we've got all these rights now, but we still face violence. Why are we not seen as human beings? Why are we mistreated? So what happens now in this contemporary stage of feminism and political mobilization is that in many countries and in many regions all over the world, violence against women has become an epidemic, another pandemic, the real pandemic, you know? So in Latin America in particular, there are a number of movements that are articulated through the notion of violence. So here we have the Ni Una Menos protests in Argentina that were triggered in 2016 after the feminicide of a young woman, and not only the feminicide, but the re-victimization of her and the impunity to get justice. And we also have movements that not only take place within the streets, but also in social media. You are probably all familiar with the Me Too movement, which was triggered in 2017. But before that, in Latin America, we had the hashtag My First Harassment, Mi Primer Acoso, where women also describe different experiences, not only of harassment, but of sexualized violence and bullying and, you know, you name it. So that's also interesting about this contemporary moment within feminist mobilizations, that they take place not only on the streets, but also in the digital world, and they are usually connected. From this, I want to draw your attention to two moments in 2019. I know this is a year also important for African feminism, so I was like, oh, this is very interesting, you know. It's not like these are isolated events. They come from a very long tradition of mobilization within Latin America. Think about Latin America as a region with, though contexts vary, with a history of colonization, with a history of dictatorships, with a history of authoritarianism, with a history of poverty, with governments that since the 1980s have uncritically engaged with neoliberal economic and political policies. So it's a bit of a mess, right? And these things have an impact, in particular in the bodies of women and feminized subjects. So apart from that, I think 2019 there's something in the articulation of the way feminists think about violence that led to this particular moment. First, in Mexico City, we have an impromptu demonstration on August 16th. See, these are some of the images. So this is now called the Glitter Revolution. Feminists take glitter or purple glitter or gas that is also purple, and they invade the in the best possible way. They take on the streets. But in this demonstration in particular, people were shocked because there was a level of violence. There were vehicles set on fire. There was monuments being intervened, statues smashed, things set on fire. And the picture on the bottom right, that is the column of independence. If you've been to Mexico, or when you go to Mexico, I encourage you to go and see it. This is a place that whenever, which is not quite rarely, but whenever the Mexican soccer team wins something, people go there and celebrate. So it's like this very important monument for public gathering. And it also represents the independence of Mexico. So people call it the angel of independence, but actually it's the winged victory, and it's a female, but it's usually addressed as a male. Not that angels have sex, but anyway. So this is the aftermath of that demonstration. As you see, there's women intervene the monument. They wrote on the center the words Mexico Feminicida, Feminicide Mexico. I don't think you can see. There it is. And this was shocking because it was not the first time that women were mobilizing, but it was the first time that they were doing it in such a strong and probably violent way for the eyes of the outsiders. Some people were even calling for punishment, like harsh punishment for the demonstrators. Some people were like, who these women think they are? They should be put to jail and probably sent to, the death penalty. So it was interesting to see the reactions. And also there was this feeling of feminists created this feeling of patriotism because people were very worried about monuments and statues. And we're like, oh my God, why is this happening? Why are they breaking everything? And the feminists were like, well, because we are being killed, So what's more important, the lives of women or monuments? So that's an ongoing debate. But I just wanted to show you these forms of demonstrations that are taking place. And ever since 2019 in Mexico City, feminists have become a threat to public order. Every time there is a demonstration, either an organized one or an impromptu one, the government tries to catch a women and tries to protect the statues. And even the Ministry of Defense has listed feminist organizations as a threat to public safety on the same level as some drug cartels and Al Qaeda. So that's how dangerous women are now perceived. Some of them have Molotov bombs, but that's not saying. And the other feminist mobilization that I wanted to pay attention to is the one that took place in the city of Valparaíso in Chile with a different approach. This is a performance by a feminist collective, Las Tesis. Maybe some of you have heard about it. So this is these women who it's very beautiful. That is a very interesting and thought-provoking and inspiring performance. And they have become a household name for Latin American feminism. They are very young women. They are also at the university. They have some of them have MA degrees, and even without all that, what we find in this contemporary mobilizations, I think, is a long tradition of pointing what are the structures that try to that very effectively produce and reproduce gender inequalities. So it is not a coincidence that these movements, like the one that the last thesis embrace, also comes from a tradition of feminist manifestos. Manifestos are not something new, and they don't only belong to the left-wing politics. There are also right-wing manifestos, we know. However, within the leftist movements, there's a very interesting tradition. Now, the last thesis have recently published this manifesto. In Spanish, it's called Quemar el Miedo. The English version has been just launched. It's called Set Fear on Fire, the feminist goal that set the Americas ablaze. So there's this idea that feminism has to be, contemporary feminism has to be articulated around the struggle against capitalism and neoliberalism, patriarchy, sexism and misogyny, racism, and the good fight for the ecology. So on this note, I cannot, for matters of time, because I really want to talk to you, I won't address all of these issues. I just want to focus on curriculum. In particular, I want to focus on the impact of neoliberalism within our societies. Neoliberalism, we can define it as the current state of capitalism. It is not only a logic that has to do with the economics. It also has to do with politics. It has to do with the creation of particular types of subjectivities. So the main purpose, the main goal of neoliberalism is to dismantle the state. The state has to be less powerful, and also has to have less authority in certain areas such as health, education, and community formation. So it's a new form of laissez-faire. And this also is explained by different forms of privatization of industries. I think the health system is a very good example how in many countries, or in some countries, you need to have a job in order to have a health insurance instead of thinking of health as a human right. So there's this sort of logic to withdraw the state from specific functions. And also with neoliberalism, as with earlier 20th century liberalism and capitalism, we have the exploitation of the workforce. We were talking about sweatshops that are still ongoing today, exploiting people's abilities and not giving them any human rights. And the effects of neoliberalism have to do with identity formation, very individualistic identities that are driven by consumption and a bit of a rejection to collective politics and engagement in wider political framework. This also has an impact on feminism, not all feminism, and here is where I want to go as I close my talk now. So, of course, neoliberalism has an impact on different places that depends on the particular context that we're talking about. It's not to say the way neoliberalism has made an impact in the US as it has in Latin America or in Africa, but we can find some commonalities. And this is interesting. In the global north, there's the idea that there exists a neoliberal feminism that has all these qualities. It is individualistic. It sort of makes people believe that in order to overcome gender inequalities, you have to work really hard. It's up to your individual work and labor and efforts to overcome any form of structural struggle. And it sort of erases the possibility for collective action because we live, and this is the narratives of many people in the global north. According to some scholars, we already live in a society that provides us with gender equality because we have access to many things and we can have access to them via consumption. And some scholars also call this a post-feminist era in the sense that feminism is no longer important. However, Latin American scholarship and the empirical evidence that we have is that that is not necessarily true. What we have in the global south, and in particular in the case of Mexico, is that there is a resistance to the neoliberalist way. There is a resistance to privatization, to exploitation, to individualism, and we see it in, the political mobilization that I've been telling you about. However, I was wondering if neoliberal feminism is something that we should worry about. And I have some examples here that kind of play the role of devil's advocate in regards to what happens with feminism in the streets. So here you have this picture that it says t-shirt that says we should all be feminists. This is by Dior, the French house designer. This t-shirt is, I think, back then, like 3 years ago, it was $500. So if you want to express your feminism, you should buy it. And then you can say, well, this is more like a global north phenomena.
And these are the words of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Exactly. And I don't think she gets any profit from it. Or maybe not. And then you can say, well, this is a phenomenon from the global north. But I got here some examples. This is from Mexico. This is a campaign by Nike. It says, "Together we are unstoppable." So it's a TV commercial. And it's prominent, the colors, the nice colors that surround these women, and they're happy and they're joyous and they're, running and trying to smash the patriarchy. But of course, they're selling shoes, right? And this was a very successful ad. It even won some awards. It's very enticing, actually. When you watch it, it's like, yes, I want to buy my shoes and run against the patriarchy. And then we also have these examples. One is the recent cover of the Marie Claire magazine. It's a fashion magazine in Mexico. It talks about sorority. And it's been heavily criticized because it doesn't portray other types of women. These, in the Mexican context, are known as white women. I know these categories are arbitrary, but they do not represent how the general population in Mexico look like. And the fact that the magazine talks about sorority, which is another kind of key concept for feminist theorizing and mobilization. So you can see that there's something neoliberal going on with how neoliberalism appropriates the messages of feminism. And then I found this on Amazon. So you can get your makeup bag that says peace, love, and feminism for roughly $12, $15 maybe. And then you have a key ring that says keep your rosaries up my ovaries. This is a translation of a very popular slogan in Mexico and Latin America. Saquen sus rosarios de nuestros ovarios. So you can also get your feminist fight for reproductive rights key ring for $15. So there's something going on there that is in sharp contrast with the mobilizations. We need to think about these sort of messages. And to me, the most striking neoliberal intake on feminism is this one. So there's this woman who has this Instagram webpage, and I don't know if you remember the phrase Mexico Feminicida from one of the previous slides. This was written in 2019 during the demonstration, and then this woman, she decides to sell this the tote bag and the t-shirt, so you can go to the demonstrations or wherever you go, you make political statement, and that costs like $17. So of course this got huge backlash because people were saying that she's profiting from pain and from the fact that women are dying. In average 11 women are killed in Mexico every day. So it is an interesting example of this sort of road that some neoliberal feminism is taking in Mexico. So my question to trigger a dialogue with all of you today has to do with how can we respond to the commodification of feminism, and if there are any similarities between Latin American mobilizations, Latin American feminist mobilizations, and African mobilizations. And that would be all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This was really fascinating, right? Yeah, I would really, I would like you to join me again in thanking Dr. Chaparro Martínez. Really touched upon so many issues that are relevant, not only to the African continent, but to other parts of the global South as well. And you've taken a global perspective as well, right? I think you ended your presentation. I'm not going to repeat your sum up your the wonderful arguments that you made, but I think you ended with a really, really important question, or two questions, how do we respond to the commodification of feminism or feminisms, and also whether there are any similarities between feminist mobilizations in Latin America and Africa. Okay, so we'll take like 3 questions at a time.
In the video, the women were wearing blindfolds during the performance. So what does that symbolize?
The dance, the performance, imitates a person being detained by the police in Chile, like an illegal detention. So have to remember that Chile comes from a dictatorship that took place for like over 20 years with Pinochet. So illegal detentions were quite common, and apparently I read somewhere that they used to blindfold people, ask them to put their hands up. That's why they also do this, and to go on their knees. So on their knees. So it's a performance of that. But then when you see them like joyfully dancing, that's kind of their own form of resisting that. But it comes from that. It's a mimicking of the detention. Yeah. Good eye, huh?
Yeah, I was noticing that too.
Yes. Do you want to say more?
No, with the blindfold, because there was a part in the video where, which was true, they were saying that, you know, it didn't matter what I was wearing, I was still raped, and so I feel like that's everywhere, like, you know, people think like, oh, you were like wearing a dress or you were wearing a skirt, so it was very easy, but like, I was all covered up, how can you say that I wanted it just by wearing clothes, like I wasn't naked.
But even if she was,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that probably it also shows it's the blindfold is a hint to how justice is supposed to be blind, but in the end it's not, because women are re-victimized. So maybe they're also being a bit ironic about it. But yeah, it's true. There's this idea that when violence happens, it's usually the victim's fault. And that is a narrative that is constant, not only for women, but for many other identities. In the case of women, we can explain it as it has a disciplinary message. Like it doesn't only discipline the woman that is being the target of that violence, but it's also telling the rest of the women, if you do not behave, this is going to happen to you. So there's a strong message there, so the thing is that for many women, no matter what you do, you can be all covered or not, and we have a system that seeks to criminalize women just for being there, and that needs to be changed. That's why gender is a form of oppression as well.
I liked in the video how at the end they were like, it's the president, it's state, it's like all of these, like, don't blame us, it's them.
Yeah, and it's not an individual guilt, it's a structural. We're talking about structures here. When they say the president, they don't mean a particular individual. They mean the whole system of power that is there.
So by criminalizing women, we are trying to diminish their power to prevent them from fearing the power of the men.
Well, I think that question supposes that women have power, or that sharing power that power is something that we cannot change, that it's there for us to grab. And I think that a very important message for feminism is that we need to change power itself, because it's not like, okay, now it's our turn to be in power, and if we don't change the way those power relations work, then what's the point, right? So imagine if someone says, well, it's not about just changing who's there. It's about changing the whole light bulb, because if you just hold the light bulb and then now it's the turn of women to do it, the light bulb is the same. You need to take that light bulb away and put another one, or not put any at all, and have other forms of relationships. So, but there is, of course, a message that says women should not have power, because then we'll exterminate men. So there are these narratives that also try to prevent women from, entering in certain places and provide and propel some political change.
So if the protests, and the demonstrations remind you of any maybe events that we had discussed in this class, maybe earlier in the semester. Do you see any resonance? Anybody other than I am? We'll come back to you. Okay, go ahead.
Sitting on a man came to mine.
Could you explain what that is?
It's like, it's hard, I don't know why it's hard to describe it, but like, it's just it's like a way where women taking power to protest, but in ways where, it's kind of similar where you're taking natural and normal things from men, and, or you like actually sit on them to protest, like literally like sit on them, so you can sit on them and like they can completely understand the issue that like, if I sit on top of you, maybe you'll understand. And like they will take, like wives will stop having sex with their husband because there's nothing's changing. So we'll start in household and it'll just like kind of travel. So like, it kind of reminded me of that because I was like, the root to the issue is that they're not recognizing something's wrong. They're not recognizing that they're kind of the root of the issue. The root of something is gonna, if the root is already destroyed, it's not gonna grow. So it's kind of like trying to make them realize that like, you maybe, not all of you are the problem, but the system that you guys are a part of is not gonna help anything.
Thank you.
I was gonna say, it reminds me of Pray the Devil Back to Hell, the movie that we had to watch.
What's the name again?
Pray the Devil Back to Hell.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a documentary about women in Liberia and how they organized a movement to fight for peace during the war in Liberia. And they were led by, I think her name was Lima Boy. Yeah, Lima Boy, and she won a Nobel Peace Prize too. So it was a really inspirational movie and reminded me of how they united to fight for one cause.
Thank you. And I want to add also regarding the protest, sitting on the man is the title of an article by Judith Van Allen. And it actually documented activism amongst women in Nigeria during the colonial period. And they were protesting taxation. You know, they heard that the colonial administration was going to levy taxes on women as well. And so they organized. And one of the things they wanted to do was destroy a certain administrative building. It was called the ABBA administration building. And that I remember, the protests near the monument, right, in Mexico City reminded me of that protest in Nigeria. It was in the 1950s. Yeah.
And the movie is from the documentary.
Liberian, the documentary is from Liberian.
And it's
2003.
So are you ready to go to the demonstration now? Is there any question that you have, or what do you think about buying products to stage one's identity as a feminist? I mean, and is it wrong in itself, or is it only wrong when it comes from big companies, or when they become, say, luxury thing? Or what about if I have my feminist workshop with my friends and we do t-shirts in order to sustain it, we do sell them for a minimum price? So what do you guys think? I have you fascinated. What's your name?
Stephanie.
Stephanie.
I feel like it's a good idea to promote like your feelings and stuff, because then other people might know as well, like, oh, I didn't know about this, I didn't know about this, but also it has a deeper meaning to it. Like, for example, the keychain that says, get your rosaries off my ovaries. I mean, that's something I feel like a lot of people can relate to. Like I'm not religious in any way. Like, I don't, like, yes, my mother was religious, my parents, you know, had me grow up in somewhat religious background. But me myself, I'm not religious. Like, I don't want to sound awful, but I don't care. Like, you know, it's my body, my choice. I should have the right to do that. Like, and so why should your religion affect what I do with my body and how I perceive my life choices, what I identify as? Like, and so that's something that I strongly agree with, and I think other people would too, and so that's just my 2 cents on it.
Thank you for investing it.
Yeah, I feel like bigger corporations doing it kind of rubs me the wrong way. So I feel like it's kind of a way to pander to them
Okay.
and pander to like a situation, like you're making that much, you're charging that much money for a t-shirt that you think is gonna support a cause. It doesn't really, most people can't afford it. So it's like, there's no purpose of you having it if most people can't even have it. But like smaller businesses where like it's affordable and maybe money's going to some like a foundation or some type of organization, it makes more sense. Because that seems more genuine, that you're not making it impossible to get. It's like gatekeeping it in a way.
And also, like, bigger businesses might not even give money to the actual organization that they're trying to, you know, promote their product from. They could just take all the money themselves, and so.
So it would be less worse if they give the money away.
Yeah.
Okay, very.
It's also, just to add on to that, they like to pick and choose when they want to sell these items and when they want to promote these kinds of causes. It's not a constant thing. It's like, oh, something has happened, or it's Pride Month, or it's Black History Month. Oh, let's support this, but not actually.
There's a logic of the market there. It's, yeah, here.
I was gonna say I agree to like what everybody's saying. I just feel like. I feel like the organization should be able to like make the shirts, because it's like, it's giving them okay for them to like, you know, promote the shirts, but not, I don't think the big corporations should do it, because like everybody says, they're only, it's only a certain time they would do it, and then sometimes they wouldn't give money to the organization. They would just keep it as a profit, because they're just trying to make it seem like they're supporting it, meanwhile they're not. So I'd rather have the organization like the women make the t-shirts and sell it, instead of the big corporation makes the t-shirts and sell it, because you get to see the message from them instead of the corporation that's trying to get money in their pockets.
Okay, and it's, you want to say that?
Oh, yeah. I think aside from where like the proceeds go, I was gonna just say that I think it's important to wear the clothing or have these keychains or water bottles or whatever it is, it sparks dialogue. And when people see these things, they might be curious about it, and then it's a way to get more exposure on this topic, because those are the numbers, and I think we could reach more people when are actively like involved in where so.
Yes.
I agree with the like, I guess you can reach more people. I feel like when it comes to like organizations, they could probably reach more group of people if they're selling it, like if they're the ones selling it. But it also, I feel, would have either all of it or like half of it has to go to like the cause that they're promoting for. So I feel like sometimes with the smaller businesses, they're not able to reach out to like a bigger audience and get their message like across farther. So I feel like it's okay, like I also agree with it being sold all the time, not just on certain occasions, but also like the profit going to the actual thing they're promoting.
Okay, do you think that it is similar to have a t-shirt that reads, "We should all be feminists," to having one that says "Feminicide Mexico"? Like, let's try to contrast these two ideas, right? It's interesting that they put them in white, right? They're white t-shirt. So they make a message more prominent. So what do you think about this? Is it the same? Is it, you know, it's identity formation through what we wear? It's this is identity formation. Like, I'm saying that I'm a feminist, and I think that feminism is for everyone, from the spirit of Amanda. And this one is doing a protest, right? It's saying this is a country where women are murdered. Here actually it says, Mexico, a feminicide country. Welcome to Mexico, a feminicide country where a woman is killed every 4 minutes. and the government doesn't give a fuck. It's my French, I'm just translating. So words, not in academic settings. So what do you guys think about this? Like, not only identity, but political protest through consuming, like, this is not something that I made at my home, something that I bought from someone. Yes.
I feel like this one is more personal, sort of. It really like shows how they are in pain. Yeah, and the other one, I would say, it also sends a strong message, but it may not be as, I wouldn't say influential, but like, it doesn't sort of give you that, as much of a connection as this one does. Yeah.
I think there was someone in the back, I don't know, did you raise your hand? No, then it was here.
Oh, I was gonna agree with what she said. I think for sure, I just think it has like, I don't think it's like, even though it's a deep message, but I don't really think it has a deep message. Because they probably would think like, it's just a regular shirt you get to put on. And it's like, okay, I'll wear the shirt, but this one, I feel like this, like this shows the message. It shows like, this is what's going on in Mexico. And what should we do to like help them out and, try to make it better than, oh, should we all be feminists? Right? Should we all be feminists? Oh, we should all. Yeah, instead of, yeah, cause if I was just thinking as just a shirt, I'm just gonna put on and it's whatever, and I don't know the deeper meaning to it than this message right here.
And also
I think,
it's also, I mean, it's for people that are not in Mexico, it's a welcome, so it's for someone who's not aware of what's happening. There was someone in the back and then, yes, there.
That's also what I was going to say about how it's actually spreading information. And it's also a good, like shock advertisements, if you've seen those before, I saw a clip the other day, of a bunch of shock advertisements that are just like really grab your attention and it makes you feel some type of way. And the other one, we should all be feminists, is like, yeah, I guess we should, great, moving on. And it doesn't really pass any kind of message, but this makes you stop and say it.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I feel like it also by like putting a specific country or like a specific culture, I feel like it kind of like gives them like, it holds accountability to like the country and more like, kind of like, for this one to be like Mexico, you need to get it together really. I feel like.
Okay, so you have an idea of a business here. Think about something that you would put in a tote bag. Welcome to the US, and then I leave it to you to interpretation. Yes.
I am from Mexico and we are mad. Yeah, like this is like a message and what we are feeling right now, we are angry at what's happening. So I identify with the message, sadly.
Could you elaborate?
Why are you not, if I may ask?
I don't know, it's a very sensitive subject right now. I actually have a question. I don't see it as much as I see it in Mexico. I just moved here less than a year ago. So I haven't seen or heard that many noise here in the States as I see it back in Mexico.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that's a question for US feminism. What's going on here? Why are women not taking over the streets in the same way? What happens with American political culture? I don't know, because that's not something that I've researched on, or but it's more like an observation. Like, what's her name?
Mariana.
Like Mariana's observation. Like, I think the Roe versus Wade was an important landmark, and then it's gone. So what happens with the feminists there? But yeah, that's a question for American feminism. Yeah.
I have a relevant question, actually, and before that, I want to say that Nigerian women played important roles in anti-colonial struggles. I mean, the nationalist, organizing us colonialism, but the ABBA protests happened in the late 20s, not in the 50s, okay? 1929 in November, okay? I just want to correct this piece of information. My question is that I think it's related to, this last comment, really important comment. And that is, we know, like, and I always say that, feminists in Latin America and in South Asia are better organized at present than feminists within the African continent, for example, okay? Or in the African diaspora, and they are more militant, okay? So how do you explain that, okay? And also what strategies can feminists elsewhere and like women activists, I would say, because feminism is a contested term in many African countries as well. So what strategies can we learn from feminists and women activists in Latin American countries? And also, I'm really curious about the strategies for organizing, because some of these protests, they look spontaneous, okay? Some of them are not spontaneous. They're really nicely curated, very well organized. How does that happen? And then the final part of this question is, I'm really also curious about feminist and women's organizing and mobilizations as part of broader social movements, within the continent. I will not expect you to address all these questions now. We are about to finish our class, but these are questions for us to think about for the future, but I would love to hear your insights.
Yeah, very quickly, there is an idea that there is, of course, organization within Mexican feminisms. There are different types, and also there are several internal conflicts, because there are not only the concept of feminism is contested, but the very concept of women is contested. Who is the we when we march, right? We go to march, who encompasses that we. So there are also many political contradictions and antagonisms within the movement. And I think that even when there's this organization about, it's about a march and demonstrate and probably smash some sculptures or try to smash the patriarchy symbolically or physically, I think the organization still lacks a political agenda, because there are all these differences coming together. And that is a strategy that we should not replicate in our context. I think we learn from that as well. The movement it's quite surprising in many ways, and it not only has this sort of a solemn character to it. There's also joy. There's also this there's festivity about engaging with other women and taking over the streets. Even when you're protesting violence, that is so horrible. But I think there are, that is a strategy, like you convey a message not only with the intervention or the smashing or the bomb of bombs, but also through art, through humor, through performance. That's also interesting. And then there's a public message there. I think what's lacking is a political agenda with specific steps, because then you have the demonstrations and then you get to the main square and everyone is on the road, So I think that's why I was saying that there are these sort of neoliberal individualistic forces that are still kind of not allowing for the movement to come to a full in a way, so with this question.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our session, by the way.